Hey there, I'm Ben Manckiewicz. Today on TCM, as a way of showing our thanks to the broader TCM community, we're letting fans choose the movies, each fan a member of the TCM backlot. And joining me right now from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, just outside of Harrisburg, Larry Kaspar. Larry, welcome.
Thank you. What an honor to be here, Ben.
Oh, well, that's kind of you to say. What's the film you've chosen this afternoon?
A Face in the Crowd from 1957 with Andy Griffith.
Yeah, it's his big screen debut, one of my favorite movies. Great choice. First, how did you get into classic films?
I think, Ben, for most men my age, when I got into classic films, the first thing I was exposed to was monster movies, because of course that's what you're interested in. So once I discovered Frankenstein and Dracula, and especially King Kong, when that was put on TV some 40 years after it was made, that was my first exposure to classic films.
And when did you discover TCM? Obviously, if you're a backlot member, TCM sort of became part of your life. When did that happen?
It did become part of my life. And I'm glad to say TCM, when it went on the air in 1994, I was right there when you went on the air for the first time. And it really filled a need, Ben. There's no question about it, because all the way through the 80s, that was kind of a desert, at least in my life, for classic movies. There was no place to really see them. So when TCM came on in 1994 and exposed me to so many different things, it was just an explosion of cinema. And I kept digging deeper and deeper in what you were showing. It was like an archaeological dig. I went all the way back to the silent era, and I appreciated all these different decades, and all of them had different merits.
Wow, you're like the prototype for a TCM fan. We want to clone the Larry Casper model. Why? First of all, what do you do for a living?
I work at a TV station called PCN, that stands for Pennsylvania Cable Network, and it does primarily public affairs, which means it's kind of like C-SPAN, but it's more about state government in Pennsylvania. And we do other things as well, like high school sports, and we even do something special every year, and that involves Phil the Groundhog, because he's actually a state resident. He's right here in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. And we had no idea what he was doing. So one year we decided to go out to Punxsutawney to see just what happened with the groundhog. And we've been showing it for some 20 some years. So we're kind of the unofficial network of the groundhog, you might say.
The unofficial network of not Groundhog Day the movie, the unofficial network of the actual groundhog?
This is the real groundhog, Ben. And that's what's interesting about this, because I think before we went out to Punxsutawney, the whole thing was kind of abstract. And I'm talking about the mid 90s. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't know where the groundhog was, what he was going to do, or what the ceremony was. And I think my entire life, and I've lived in Pennsylvania all my life, I didn't think too much about Phil the Groundhog until the mid 90s, when we started considering going to Punxsutawney to see what was going on there.
Are you a fan of the Bill Murray movie? It's one of my favorite comedies.
Honestly, this comes as a surprise to some people when they find out that I've done all this coverage with Groundhog Day. I've never seen the movie the whole way through, to tell you the truth.
That's a ridiculous thing to say. That's an outrage, Larry. I mean, look, man, it's good. You should just relax, watch it. It's good. Doesn't mean you can't like a movie like A Face in the Crowd just because you like Groundhog Day.
Oh, I understand. I understand. Yeah. I mean, I've seen parts of it, so someday I'm just going to have to make the time to sit down and watch it from beginning to end. Maybe part of it for me is kind of the frustration of seeing the same thing happen over and over again. Maybe I have little patience for that. I don't know.
Yeah, that is kind of the point of the movie. What made you pick? What connects with you regarding A Face in the Crowd?
A Face in the Crowd was so astonishing to me, really nothing short of that, because I didn't know it existed until I caught up with it on TCM, I think sometime in the early aughts, and I saw that Andy Griffith was in it. And what connected with me was really a word, one particular word. And you know how words go in and out of style with the public. In the last 5 years or so, I'd seen this word over and over in print, and I thought, I got to find the definition of this word. And it's prescient. And so it really does have knowledge of things that haven't even happened yet. The way the screenplay is adapted by Bud Schulberg, who wrote the original story, then he adapted his screenplay. What he had to say about the influence of television as it was happening, and I think that's the important distinction. As it was happening, he understood the profound effect effect of television. And in this case, we have a charismatic drifter, Lonesome Rhodes, who really doesn't know anything about TV, but he learns quickly, and that power becomes part of his life.
Larry, I think you're right. The notion that Elia Kazan and Bud Schulberg could see in 1957 where we were going to be in 2007 and 2017, today in 2018, is stunning. Every time you see it, it feels stunning.
Right, and it's still a cautionary tale, no question, and its message really never goes out of fashion, which is when there's a certain charismatic personality that just takes command of a medium, they can be corrupted by that power. And also in the face in the crowd, what's interesting to me is the emerging power of the sponsor. Oh, and Vitajex, of course, the Vitajex pill that will restore your virility. Ben, we have Vitajex today. That persists to this day. In fact, you can go on the internet and then you see the head of a 75-year-old man grafted on the body of a 25-year-old bodybuilder. It's the same thing. It's making promises for things that people want to consume, but they're often fraudulent. In fact, in the face in the crowd, they do some research on the product Vitajex, and they're all satisfied with the conclusion that at least it won't hurt you.
Larry, thanks very much. Great choice. We'll talk more after the movie. From 1957, directed by Elia Kazan, selected by TCM fan Larry Kaspar, A Face in the Crowd. Back with me to talk about A Face in the Crowd and why he chose it, TCM backlot member Larry Kaspar. Larry, the movie still resonates no matter how many times you see it, right?
There's no question about it. And it was such a revelation. The first time I saw it, it was more than a revelation. It was kind of a shock, frankly, because when you think of Andy Griffith, of course, being beloved for portraying Sheriff Andy Taylor, when you see him portraying a Jekyll and Hyde character here with a maniacal, even frightening intensity, it just shows you how much ability he had. And also, it's worth noting that this was his debut on the screen.
Yeah, look, I've taken nothing away from playing Andy Taylor, and obviously it created a great life for him, and I'm sure he wouldn't change a thing. But if he'd never gone into television, you imagine after seeing A Face in the Crowd that this is a guy who could have had a significant career in movies, certainly a significant career on the stage. He's an enormously talented actor.
Yeah, no question about it. And he brings such an intensity to every single scene. For example, when the movie starts, he's on the floor. He's completely down and out. He's a drifter. You can imagine he got off of a boxcar with his guitar. He got into trouble. He ends up in jail. He's on the floor. And then he's kicked by the sheriff because someone has come to visit the prisoners, someone who wants to do some kind of impromptu radio show. So they kick Lonesome Rhodes on the floor, and he starts awake like a dog that's been kicked so many times. And he's initially very angry, and he's even that dog that's tempted to bite you, but he won't do it. In fact, that's what's interesting about this Elia Kazan long take of a shot. He stays on Andy Griffith, and then you see him relax. His whole face relaxes as he starts to realize how he can manipulate this situation to his advantage.
Also a tribute to Kazan's talent, telling us right in the beginning of the movie that no matter how much you might like this guy, be aware, be wary, he's dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. And now that you mention him being likable, for me, the one moment where he was the most likable was, and one of the most interesting scenes in the movie, and we can learn from this scene today, is when the politician, the candidate, comes to Lonesome Rhodes, with his hat in his hand and his chin down, and he's saying, I want to be elected, but I don't know how. And Lonesome Rhodes says, you see this guy sitting in the back of the room? And he explains that is his companion, Beanie. And Beanie has his feet up. And then Lonesome Rhodes explains how important it is to have a person like Beanie in on a meeting like this. He said, Beanie is low mentality. He's stupid. No offense, he says. That's my favorite part. That's when he's likable. When he says no offense to Beanie, and I think he really means it. And the politician, the candidate, is there to learn. And at one point, Lonesome Rhodes asks him, do you know how to reach a person like Beanie? And he says, again with his chin down, frankly, I don't. So Lonesome starts to dispense the advice, and I mean subtle things, like how to hold your mouth. He said, now don't hold your mouth so tight together, like puckered together, because then somehow you look tense. Loosen up your mouth. And I thought that was so interesting. And then, interestingly, years later, I was watching TV with my mom, and she was watching some broadcaster, and she made some comment on why she found this person likable. And she said it was something about that, the way that person works his or her mouth. And I remember thinking, Lonesome Rhodes and my mom are right.
Yeah. Well, I'm not making any political point because I know conservatives and liberals both love this movie, but there is that line, and it was just reminiscent of the campaign. There's a line in the movie where Lonesome Rhodes, he's lying on bed, there's a line in the movie, Lonesome Rhodes lying in bed talking to Patricia Neal, and he says, you know, the people follow me no matter what I do. They're like sheep. They'll follow me like sheep. And you're just reminded of that throwaway line from Donald Trump in the campaign where he said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and they'd still support me. And it seemed then to every classic movie fan, I'm like, hey, that guy has watched The Face of the Crowd.
Exactly in that vein. And at some point, it's interesting to consider the character of Walter Matthau in this show, Ben, because he is one of the writers for Lonesome Rhodes, and he is usually the most educated person in the room, and Lonesome Rhodes holds that against him. If you remember, he calls him by a nickname, Vanderbilt 44. Hey, Vanderbilt 44. And that's his passive-aggressive way of insulting the intelligence, the expertise that this educated person might bring to the room.
All right, Larry, great stuff. Thank you so much for picking it. Thanks for joining us. Good conversation.
Thank you, Ben.
Don't go away. We have 2 more movies picked by members of the TCM backlot. Up next, Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant, and Jimmy Stewart star in The Philadelphia Story.